Hey, it's Sela Social Studies.
Hey guys, welcome to Sela Social Studies. Today we're going to be covering American neutrality and its entrance into World War II in 1941. All right, so Roosevelt, as you know, is president, and one important thing is that Roosevelt wants to stay neutral. The plan for the United States throughout this whole war was to stay neutral. We thought that we could make the most amount of money this way. So Roosevelt passes a series of Neutrality Acts, and basically they are to stay neutral. Do not repeat the mistakes that America made in entering World War I. He first signs a Neutrality Act in 1935, saying that the United States would not ship arms or weapons to other nations. In 1936, he signs another Neutrality Act, saying that the United States would not loan money to countries at war, and no Americans can travel on ships of countries at war. If you remember the Lusitania incident, the sinking of the British ship, the British liner that had over 100 Americans on it, Roosevelt was trying to avoid anything else like that. In 1937, Roosevelt signs another Neutrality Act. This is where you start getting deeper into Roosevelt's plan about getting America out of the Great Depression. The Neutrality Act of 1937 says that hostile nations were allowed to acquire any items except arms, no guns, no tanks, no planes, because if we did that, then we would be, it could be taken as a warlike stance. So we could sell things like supplies, oil, ammunition. So these hostile nations can get this from the United States as long as they immediately pay for such items in cash and carry them back on non-American ships. That's what we call the Cash and Carry Act, or the Cash and Carry Basic. Okay, what that means is that these hostile nations, like Britain and France, could come to the United States, purchase ammunition, supplies, oil, gasoline from us, and bring it back on their ships. Okay, not American ships, on their ships, because the United States is trying to stay neutral in this war. Okay, he's trying to help Britain and France defeat Germany. Basically, he knows that Britain and France are the only ones who can use this cash and carry basis. So he's trying to help Britain and France against Germany. So in 1940, Churchill, who was the Prime Minister of Britain, says to Roosevelt, hey, in Britain, we can no longer afford to pay via the cash and carry basis. We are at war. We are spending a lot of money. We're trying to buy ammunition, gas, and all this other stuff, but we just can't afford it anymore. We're building planes. We're doing all this other stuff. What can we do? We need your help. We need you to not stay neutral. So now what does Roosevelt do? In 1940, Roosevelt proposes this new initiative that's going to be called the Lend-Lease Act. Okay, so Roosevelt sets up this Lend-Lease Act to provide Great Britain the supplies it needs to fight Germany, but don't pay us right away. Like during the cash and carry basis or the Cash and Carry Act, you could pay us later. The United States would lend the supplies to Britain, deferring the payment, meaning that they could pay us a lot later. But in reality, would we wind up getting, this Lend Act? When you lend somebody your rake, you expect to get your rake back. If you were to lend somebody your bubble gum, you're not going to get bubblegum back, right? So that's the idea. But this is a deferred payment. So we could ship this over there. So there's a big difference between the cash and carry and the Lend-Lease. The cash and carry is they have to pay up front and they have to take it back on their ships. Well, come 1940, Britain's out of money. They can't pay for it anymore, begging us for help. So Roosevelt goes and signs the Lend-Lease Act. And what that does is now we can go ahead and quote unquote lend them these supplies. We are still not in a wartime effort yet because we are just lending them these supplies. So while this is going on with Britain in the European front, Britain and France are fighting Nazi Germany, the United States starts having problems of its own. The United States was the main supplier of things like oil, steel, iron, and other important commodities for the Japanese. However, the Japanese were attacking China, who we were trying to help at the time. So we stopped sending Japan all these materials. We put an embargo on their stuff. We freeze all their assets in the United States. So Japan, they are keeping their troops in China, but now they turn their forces to Southeast Asia. They turn their forces to the islands of the Pacific. And what major island and what major attack do they pull off first on the United States? Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. A day that will forever live in infamy. Pearl Harbor was a naval base located in Hawaii, and Japan launched a surprise air and sea attack on Pearl Harbor, lasting just over an hour. Now, this is a picture right here of the day of Pearl Harbor. When the Japanese attacked, it was a surprise. It came out of nowhere. You have conspiracy theorists who believe that we might have known. Radar was still very, very young at the time, so what we saw, we didn't believe. But in just over an hour, there were over 3,400 casualties. 2,500 of those were deaths. We lost 2 aircraft carriers for good, the Arizona and the Oklahoma. They damaged the other 4 that were in port. The dozens of battleships, hundreds of planes were all destroyed. Now, why does the Japanese do this? Well, they can effectively cripple the U.S. naval fleet in Pearl Harbor. That was their goal. Their goal was to cripple the U.S. Navy because they knew that if the U.S. Navy was crippled, that they could go ahead and take over mostly all the islands in the Pacific Ocean. This, however, would be temporary because the United States would go ahead, they would go on and fix their battleships. The Japanese did not bomb very important oil refineries and oil storage facilities in Pearl Harbor, so we still had a lot of supplies left over. And the next day, on December 8th, 1941, Congress declares war on Japan with everybody except one vote. There is one vote against going to war. And December 8th, 1941, the United States officially joins World War II.